All right, so this session is all about you, which means if there are no questions, we wrap up in 5 minutes and go for beer. If there are questions, then we stay up until 5:30, so maximum an hour. And we do a quick introduction round. We have a mixture of people who are on the service team and users, partners, and so on. If you are interested in also coming up on stage, sharing your story around Kubernetes on AWS, you're welcome to. You can join at any point in time. And with that, we're going to start on the far right. Nick, yeah, quick introduction, just say who you are, what you're doing.
Day in the sunshine.
Hello? 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 Hello?
Hello, hello. Testing.
Hello? Hello? This one works. Hey, my name is Nick Turner, and I am a software engineer on the EKS team. I contribute to a number of open source projects. Mostly recently, have been working on the app mesh controller and the injector.
My name is Martina, and I work for Weaveworks in the EKS Cattle team. So I mainly work with EKS-related things.
Not working? Okay. This one's working? Great. I'm Michael Hausenblaus. I'm on the EKS service team. I think most recently worked on the IAM for service accounts feature.
Hi, I'm Vlad. I do DevOps consulting mostly around Kubernetes and serverless. And more recently, I'm an AWS Container Hero.
Hi, I'm Wesley. I spoke like an hour ago. So hopefully you remember who I am, but I'm the logging guy, Fluentd and FluentBit.
I'm Patrick Fiedler. I'm a DevOps engineer at neighborhoods.com. We're a real estate site, so we are not a runner or a public cloud or anything. We're an end user. So yeah.
No, you got to come up here, man. You got to come up. You got to earn your beer.
Hey, I'm Stefan. I'm the flagger guy.
You're the flagger guy, right? All right. Anyone else who wants to join us on stage? No? Okay. Then we'll open up the floor for questions. You just raise your hand, and I'll come running to you with a microphone. Who wants to go first? All right. Very good.
So I'd like to hear more about the whole GitOps workflow that you guys have been talking about. I've been following the Argo stuff for quite a while, as well as the Weave Flux stuff. And so I was more interested in hearing some details about kind of where we see that going, and if there's some kind of time frame. I know time frames. Nobody wants to talk time frames, but just some general, like how you guys feel about it and where you think we see the future of that.
So currently we have a GitOps implementation in EKS Cattle that's based on Flux and the Helm operator, which is an extension to Flux that deals with Helm charts in a GitOps way. So that's an experimental feature in EKS Cattle right now, and it's based only on Flux. Along with the Argo team, we are building this GitOps engine, which should be like a common piece of infrastructure and engineering that both projects can use. And we'll be migrating Flux towards that GitOps engine implementation. That will bring several new things to Flux. For example, Flux doesn't do external caching of all the Kubernetes objects. Argo does that, has a Redis server and caches everything there. So if you run like thousands and thousands of pods or services or deployments, that could be a better approach, having that cache there so you don't DDoS the API server. That's one advantage that Flux could get from this joint venture. On the Argo side, for example, Flux does PGP signing and verification of identity. So even if, let's say, someone hacks your Git repository and pushes some code there, normally with Argo, it will just end up and run on your infrastructure, right? With Flux, Flux checks the identity of the committer. And if someone hacks your Git repository, let's say your GitHub account, they still don't have your signing keys because your signing keys are not on GitHub, are on your own machine, right? So in a way, we ensure that even if someone has access to your repository, that doesn't mean they have the right to commit something on the cluster, right? And this is what we could add to that GitOps engine, and Argo could benefit from the Flux side. And there are many examples like this. So my opinion is that it's my personal opinion, right? We are doing small steps this direction. I don't have the bigger picture right now to tell you about it, but these small steps will, if you see those improvements, we can afterwards think about the bigger picture. But
we also have a birds of a feather in the Harborside room tonight at 5:30, I guess. So on Argo Flux and all that stuff. At 5:30, yeah, in the Harborside room. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Next question. Yes.
Hi. Got a question in regards to CloudFormation support for spinning up EKS clusters. There have been several things that we really want to do that we have to do manually, like putting the endpoint to inside internal VPC, also the ability to enable logs, enable the control plane logs, and also the OIDC output, because you have now the method, the OIDC provider output to have the pods running in their own IAM roles. So, but right now it's quite a drag for us to kind of do those things manually after we spin up the EKS cluster. And I just want to see if there's a roadmap or any sort of path where we can expose those properties as CloudFormation, so that we can do additional automation on top of that.
Is this one working? Oh, it is. Okay. Mike, you're in the back. Mike's in the back of the room. So yes, those are on our roadmap. You can follow those on our GitHub roadmap. Please thumb up it. Like we take feedback and we want your feedback. So yes, those are on our roadmap, but I don't have time frames for that.
So I heard a couple different ones. There was like the control plane logging and stuff like that. That is probably one item on the roadmap. What were the other things that you mentioned? The OIDC?
Control plane, stack logging on the control plane,
yeah.
The ability to immediately spin up the inside, put the controller endpoint inside. So logging is one. The other is the ability to spin up the EKS control plane inside of VPC as opposed to external endpoints. And finally, the exposing the OIDC provider, so that you can do the rest stuff, so that we can set up the rest of the OIDC endpoint and whatnot, so we can do the whole running the pod as with a different role idea. Right now, we're using K2IAM, which works fine for us, but we'd like to use the official way, if you will.
Yeah. Another one that people mention is adding their auth mappings via CloudFormation, which is on the roadmap. More people should upvote that one if you're interested in it.
Yes, CloudFormation support is coming soon. Where in I'll say Q1 we'll have CloudFormation support for everything that you can do through the API, and then every feature we release moving forward will have CloudFormation. Oh, and also I'm Mike Stefaniak. I'm one of the product managers for EKS.
Is there a timeline for when this is going to move into GovCloud?
Next question.
So I will say that expanding to all regions we take very seriously. Like a new region for us is a critical feature launch, and that I can't give exact timelines on that, but it's something we're working very hard on, and it will definitely happen next year.
I was just wondering if anybody could talk about the service operator and plans for that, or integration with some of the things we've talked about today.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Yeah, the question was around AWS Service Operator, right? So Chris here, in the first row, he did a very great first iteration on that starting last year. And this year we started with a slightly different approach. The last couple of months, we essentially talked with folks who are interested in contributing. And next couple of weeks, month, we're gonna do a design. So it's up on GitHub. Design issues are there. So if you're interested in chiming in, we have governance in there. So it should be clear how to contribute. And then we'll see how big the interest is, who is willing to contribute. And contribute does not necessarily mean coding, right? There are a lot of things, use cases, docs, testing, and so on. So if you're interested in, just check out the issue 456, I think, on our container roadmap, and that links also to the new repo where we are currently in this design phase, essentially. Cool. Yes.
Hi. So now that we're talking about like regions, what about China? I know that based on the roadmap, I think you are working on it, but I would like to know what are the challenges that that you have had to put EKS available there.
It's so kind of similar answer to GovCloud. Super important to us. Definitely next year. I can't give exact dates on it, but we have a lot of customers that are asking for EKS in China. So it's at the very top of our roadmap and coming soon.
Okay, but well, I'm not asking about timelines, but about challenges that you could share. Well, if you can share. That.
Like challenges of
Yes.
getting in the China region. I mean, there's some technical limitations. I won't go necessarily into details here, just about the way AWS operates there. But service-wise, EKS should work the exact same way it works in any other region.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Just to follow up on the China, when you're talking of China, are you thinking of both regions when you deploy there?
Both regions.
Okay.
I'll give you a moment. Let's have Patrick talking a little bit about your experience.
Oh boy. So kind of a different story of deploying Kubernetes. We actually have an entirely homegrown system. It's roughly 2 years old, so before even EKS was announced, we're running on AWS. But at the time, we looked at solutions for deploying Kubernetes to AWS. We weren't really happy with the state of things at the time. Things have greatly improved. But we decided to kind of roll our own solution, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for most situations, but we have it, and it works pretty well for our use cases, so we'll probably stick with it. But yeah, if you guys have questions about what it's like to manage our own cluster and control plane, feel free to ask. The question was how many total clusters we manage. So we are a small company in terms of scale. So we only have 2 clusters right now. We have a dev cluster and a production cluster. On our production cluster, we range from about 20 nodes to 40 nodes. It scales throughout the day as our traffic goes up and down. So we're small, but yeah. Yeah, so the question was, do we use a cluster autoscaler? And the answer is yes. We are working on setting up spot instances. Currently, we're just on demand. We've got some reservation. but one of the important things about spot instances is that you get termination notification. You have 2 minutes to, clear out the instance before it gets killed. So we're working on, right now, our dev cluster is partially running spot instances. So we're doing some testing, working on getting that into our production cluster.
I would be remiss if I did not mention that we now have an official node termination handler in the AWS GitHub organization. So our Spot team actually was the one that developed that. So it's now been up on GitHub and public, I think, for a week or so. But yeah, it's just kind of takes lessons learned from some of the other node termination handlers that were out there and uses just the kubectl drain command infrastructure and does all that for you. So check it out.
Well, I saw that, but actually we had implemented spot cleanup before we saw that. We had already implemented a kind of a node node cleanup tool that would take care of events like if a node became unhealthy for whatever reason, it would automatically drain it. And so we kind of just implemented spot termination into that.
And if you don't mind me adding to more of the confusion, is that the same as the spot interrupter that I saw that's listed on the documentation of the EKS workshop website? And I always wonder, is that website eksworkshop.com? Is it sponsored by AWS? Sorry if. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that's maintained by our team.
And so going back to the question is because there's one section on there teaching you how to do spots, and there's one thing about deploying a app called a spot interrupter, and they tell you how to taint it so that it only runs on spots, so that it's supposed to do the same thing. And I'm just wondering if those two are the same.
I'll have to check that out. I'm not familiar whether it's the same or not. I suspect it's probably not. It probably refers to something that was out in the community. There was a number of them, some implemented in Python, Bash, and all sorts of stuff. But I'll make sure we're aligned on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, EKS Workshop may lag a little behind feature launches, but we'll make sure to update that page with the officially supported version.
That homegrown Kubernetes cluster, how many people's time does it take to maintain that?
Say that again?
Sort of about how much time does it take to actually maintain it in terms like?
So creating the whole system from scratch took a long time, spread out, not working on it full time, but it took about a year before we had something ready that we could start working in production. But on a month-to-month basis, the actual workload that we kind of need to do to maintain the cluster is, it's maybe like a quarter to maybe a little less of our time. When we have to do cluster upgrades, it depends on the version. I think the upgrade from 1.13 to 1.14 was a couple of hours, and then basically a couple of hours to go through the changelog, test everything, verify that the upgrade works, and then a couple of hours just to do the deployment, just to do it kind of slowly. Some of the version upgrades have been a little heavier, so there are changes to how Kubernetes does things. For instance, the change from, especially on the kubelet, using a whole bunch of command line options into a dynamic kubelet config file. That took a little more work because we had to figure out how everything translated. But it really depends on the version, but it's usually 2 weeks or less, and not entirely full time doing that.
I want to have a follow-up question on that. You said you went with a homegrown solution because the solutions on the market at that time, about 2 years ago, didn't fit your requirements. 2 years ago means the most popular one were COPS and AWS. Could you expand a bit on what your requirements were and why you decided to go this way?
So I did look at COPS when I started this process. I don't remember how all of the reasons, but one of the major reasons is we didn't like that etcd was running on the master nodes. So in our setup, we have etcd run as on separate instances. On our production cluster, we actually have 5 etcd nodes that are actually T3. The CPU on them is less than 5%. And those are spread across 5 AZs, and we only have 2 API server master nodes on our production cluster. But even if one AZ goes down, because the storage plane is HA, there's no worry about like quorum loss with having 2 masters.
I just wanted to follow up on the we had multiple region questions, and the reason why a region might be available but EKS isn't there is not because we don't want to. It just has to do with our SLA and the highly availability guarantees we have. So I think if you saw in the presentation this morning that security and reliability are job 0 and 1 for EKS. So the way we've built EKS, it requires 3 availability zones in a region. So sometimes the delay from a region being available to EKS being there is because we're waiting on that 3rd AZ, and as soon as we get that, we build as fast as we can. So sometimes that's the reason why EKS is not in a region right away.
Patrick, right?
Yeah.
How are you doing backup, DR, scores, and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so the question is how we're doing backups, recovery, the answer is that, we're just in one region, US East 1. We don't really have, our company entirely operates out of US East 1, so we don't have multi-region HA. What we do in terms of backups is we take a snapshot of every etcd node every hour, and that gets stored into S3. So in the theoretical instance of 3 etcd nodes get permanently lost, we can restore the cluster state, in theory, from any of the etcd snapshots. The reason we take one from every single one is just in case, some nodes are, might be a partial split brain issue, so we can pick whichever node to restore from.
Are you using any tooling, or is this custom?
It's basically a cron job that runs etcd, etcd control snapshot and then does an S3 upload. It's pretty basic.
Hi, I have a question about UIs. I'm new to the Kubernetes space. We've looked at Rancher, and now I saw Argo today. We're looking at UIs for deploying and managing clusters into multiple AWS accounts. What are some other UIs that are out there, and which one is the one that's most tightly integrated with AWS?
So is your use case talking about like a continuous deployment, a UI to manage multiple clusters, or within a single cluster, what are my deployments, jobs, PVs?
Both. We need a UI that will allow us as an admin team to deploy clusters and applications into those clusters across different accounts, and then for each account, we have a smaller admin team that needs to access the UI for that account and manage the applications in those accounts.
So I'll talk about the second use case, which is viewing within a single cluster, viewing your deployments, pods, persistent volumes, secrets, So that's a big focus for us in 2020 is building a native support for a dashboard to EKS, where you'll be able to view all of those things. And we think we can do a lot better than the existing Kubernetes dashboard, which you can install in EKS today, but we plan on building our own homegrown version. For the use case of multi-cluster management, I think there's, as you mentioned, Argo is something where we're putting our weight behind as the EKS team. So that's what we're gonna focus a lot of our development. There are a lot of third-party tools out there, like Rancher you mentioned. Spinnaker.
And you're with the AWS EKS team?
I'm on the EKS team.
Okay, and you're going with Argo?
Well,
I mean, I'm new to this, so I'm just like trying to figure out all this.
no, it's fine. So the Argo CD and Flux CD communities are merging.
Okay.
So the Argo CD and Flux CD communities are merging over time. The Argo UI that you saw in Pratik's demo this morning was actually Intuit's internal developer platform that they use. It's built on top of Argo's UI components, but I think it's got some Intuit special sauce in there as well. Flux has the Flux Web, is that right? It's not part of Flux CD's repo. It's built by Stefan, who's the company or the group behind. Well, there's WeaveCloud, yes, but that's
You can buy WeaveCloud.
Yeah,
I'm joking.
that's not something you can download and install. Anyway,
There is no UI like what you are asking for.
Yeah.
There is
You,
an
you
UI.
can you can build the UI from various components, but what you saw demoed this morning from Pratik is their internal Intuit developer platform.
So that's not Argo.
It's not something you can just download and install. No, it's built on. It's built on top. Well, Argo UI has other things in it, and you can install Argo UI. But what you saw demoed this morning is a bit of a on top of that. Yeah, for the Intuit internal development teams.
I wanted to jump in here, and that's what we were chatting about. There is no tool that does that. There are tools that do kind of maybe part of it-ish. There's Gartner, which I like. It's only for cluster management and cluster creation, and it's using the new, fresh, hot Kubernetes project that is still not ready for production, I think, called Cluster API, which automates and gives an API over the cluster creation process. I think it originated at SAP, Gartner, I'm not sure, but it's basically a new UI for creating clusters easily in multiple clouds and stuff like that. But there's nothing that does both cluster and apps. You can look at stuff like, what was it? They have an ice cream as a logo. Crossplane and stuff like that, but the area app is not at all mature. That's why there's work being done on the cluster API to especially give an API on top of this, on top of cluster creation. On the app side, yeah, the new GitOps project is what's new and trying to standardize a bit, but everything being so new and fresh and changing all the time, there is not one thing that does it all. Sorry.
Thank you. Do you quickly want to do that now? Okay.
How about the AWS Service Broker project? Is that still that's something I had played around with quite a bit and had looked at a lot of kind of different ways of using the Kubernetes controller pattern. I don't know if this is the right group. Using the controller pattern to build other cloud-native services and things like deploying databases and stuff like that. There was AWS Service Broker, and I think there was another one that was kind of sort of related.
Service Operator?
Service Operator, and like one was more like Service Broker, and Anyway, are those projects still something you guys kind of actively look into and develop, and is there a future in that way of provisioning? I always like the idea of like using Kubernetes as kind of like the baseline for everything, and so I didn't know if there's any kind of future in that.
Michael said before.
Yeah, so the future definitely is the service operator, so we're working on that.
and essentially the missing features, things like bind, unbind, different profiles, and so on that you can have through the service broker, eventually will also show up in the service operator. So going forward.
And bear in mind that that is still being designed, so jump in. I also am a bit reluctant because it makes the cluster super stateful. And that means that you won't be able to easily do upgrades, blue-green stuff, cluster failovers, without having to do something more intense to get your resources back. But jump in the design chat.
So EKS Cattle will soon have a controller. It will be a controller that's an operator that's running on a management cluster. So you can do things like EKS Cattle apply a file, and that file specifies how your cluster should look like, and that's synchronized as Flux. Let's say Flux synchronizes app deployment spec, right? You can synchronize a cluster spec. So you can define, you have a Git repo with all your clusters, and there is this management Kubernetes EKS instance that will manage all the other instances. So you can do things like, this is a cluster API implementation for EKS.
Why that instead of cluster API? What's the account support?
I don't know. We are still working on the single account support. We'll see what gets out of it.
It would be a cluster API driver.
Yeah. But that's something that you can provision VPCs and all this stuff. For example, an app mesh that spreads the network across all your clusters in multiple regions. I think in terms of linking together clusters, app mesh will be the way to do it instead of making the CNI do cross-region and cross-zones and cross-compute. I hope so. That's my hope for app mesh.
I think you may have answered part of my question. I was watching the app mesh demos or the presentations, and I wasn't sure if that was AWS specific features or, if you have a multi-cloud or hybrid scenario, can you run app mesh, or what pieces are needed outside of the paved path that Amazon is trying to provide, to link those together. That wasn't very clear. It was very Amazon focused, which I understand, but there's other scenarios too.
So I think the question was like how much, if you want to run app mesh on your cluster, how much of it is supported by Amazon and how much of it is not? Is that kind of the question?
Basically, what do you need to do to have a like say you needed to run, or you were running EKS and you were trying to peer with, say, China or something that EKS isn't in yet.
So with the goal of connecting multiple clusters together?
Multiple clusters, multiple clouds, multiple cloud providers.
Multiple, okay. So
So
I think it's a little
sometimes
too early
outside of our control.
Yeah, I think it's a little too early for connecting multiple clouds together. But the pieces you need for starting with just a single cluster, you would be running the open source projects that Amazon supports, the app mesh controller and the app mesh injector. Those are available as Helm charts today. You can install them really easily into a cluster. Multi-cluster support is possible today, and we're working on improving that now. And you can also link, EC2 instances, ECS clusters. But yeah, multi-cloud is a bit out of scope.
I can answer that. Like, it's Envoi based, right? And app mesh goal from the beginning was like that Envoi can be programmed remotely, not only by app mesh. So for example, Istio has a thing called Mixer and Pilot. So you could, let's say, deploy Istio on GKE, you could deploy app mesh on EKS, and you can make those work together and expand the mesh. But this is,
do that, but it's not easy.
no, it's purely theoretical. Nobody tried it. It's very hard to do it, but it is possible. It is a future here because Envoi is the main driver of running all these networking bits, right? So
it's something nobody really thought after wanting to admit they've done.
yeah.
Wanting to admit they have done. That's a nice conclusion. Yeah. Yeah.
So financial services industry, segmentation is, not silos, but segmentation is kind of required. The profiles that were presented earlier today, curious to know if I could get some more insight into those models and profiles and how you build these profiles. Is it something proprietary to AWS? Is this something coming more from the Weave? And if anybody on stage can expand on what's currently available now and what's more like the next couple iterations, what are the big things coming from that space?
So profiles are totally open source. There's nothing hidden there, it's nothing proprietary. It's a Git repo, public, that now it's on the Weaveworks account, tomorrow can be on an AWS account. It can also be on your own account. So you can create your own profile for your specific workloads and use that with EKS Cattle, and EKS Cattle will provision it on your cluster. What we are doing right now, we are doing a little bit of templating. So for example, if you have like variables like the region, the EKS cluster name, and stuff like that, you can embed those values inside your Helm charts or your deployment spec. For example, if you deploy the ALB or you deploy the AppMesh controller, it needs to know which zone it runs into. It needs to have some unique things like the cluster name, which should be unique across your account. So we can inject those values inside your deployment spec. But that's about it in terms of templating. We want to give freedom to everybody to build these profiles. On the long term, I think the goal is to provide official profiles. AWS will provide those, and people can contribute to them.
Got it, thank you. One last follow-up question, and just given your answer, I think it's a yes, but the open source version of your enterprise Weave, Kubernetes, the WKACTL, I think, the same profiles you could still use and apply using that open source if we wanted to play around locally?
So we have this WKP stuff. It's a Weaveworks Kubernetes service that it's an implementation of the cluster API, and we want to make it multi-cloud. Like, shouldn't be only AWS. You could provision everything. And our goal is to make this profile portable across clusters.
Got it.
Right. That's the end goal, to have a profile that can work on, if it's Kubernetes and it's compliant, it should work on it. That's the end goal.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or sharing?
It's me again. I on the roadmap, but not on timelines. So I would like to know what were the motivations behind the public containers roadmap. What are the things that you think you were not doing before, but now you're doing thanks to putting this publicly available for everyone? Because not a lot of companies, dare to do that.
Sure. So yeah, we are one of the few AWS, maybe the only, the containers org that has a public roadmap.
CloudFormation also started.
CloudFormation might also. But part of the reason is it's just the more we can hear from our customers, the more we feel like we can build something that matters. So whether you're a single developer, working on an EKS cluster, you can open an issue, and if a bunch of other people upvote that, then that catches our attention. I mean, I'm looking at that roadmap for breakfast, lunch, and dinner pretty much. It comes to the top of my inbox, and what's that? Yeah. So we just feel it's just another avenue to connect with customers, and it's really been incredible, the amount of feedback we've got on there, whether we're getting close to launching a feature, and we'll put out the final design just to make sure it handles every use case, and if it does, great. If there's something we have to tweak before launching, we do that. So I think it really helps getting features right and building features that actually solve problems. Yeah, and it's been really great for us, and the customer feedback on it has been good too. So yeah, it's something we look at very, very closely.
Do you have another internal roadmap, or is that the only roadmap that you have?
We do have an internal roadmap, but they're pretty closely synced. So yeah,
Hi,
I'm going to put you at the spot about the roadmap, or at least give a plug for EKS item 168, secret management native between AWS and Kubernetes clusters. Can you speak about that at all, or is it even a thing yet for you guys?
So I just want to make sure you, if you're setting secrets in a YAML file, having those come from AWS Secrets Manager.
I don't think it's been clearly defined in the ticket, but either, yeah, something in Secret Manager will either be synced to the cluster or directly injected into containers. One of those use cases, possibly.
Yep. This one I've been hearing a lot more recently, the integration with AWS Secrets Manager. So I would say feedback like this brings it to the higher up on the roadmap.
And this too is a space that like, it's not exactly clear what the best solution is either. Like that is a common ask, and so like we want to respond to what our customers are saying and what they want. But at the same time, Kubernetes secrets aren't like everything. Yeah, they're not exactly secret, right? Like list is get all keys and values, where like maybe you actually want something more like HashiCorp Vault, where you don't actually get the secrets out. You know what I mean? There's a lot of other ways that might better integrate than just copying secrets, like potentially, I'm just shooting here, but Secrets Manager to some sort of CSI plugin where it's not exposed in the control plane, but it's actually down in the pods where you want it. But does that make sense? So we're still like evaluating, I think, what does Secrets Manager integration mean?
The idea with the storage is awesome.
And that also shows another super important feature of the roadmap, and that is where users share their experience, saying like, oh, I've been using GoDaddy's external secrets. Here are my experiences, and that informs our design process. And the status gives you a bit of an idea where we are, like we're researching or implementing it, whatever. But that's the most important thing, that if you have clear requirements, sharing experiences with what worked for you or didn't work, limitations, yeah. That's definitely something we can use.
So I'm not sure if Michael was actually referring to this, but there is a thing called CSI Secret Store, which is a CSI driver that will essentially direct out to a pluggable secrets management layer. And so we've been thinking about integrating AWS Secrets Manager into that. So. I don't know if you were referring to that, Micah, or.
It's mostly spitballing, but.
Okay, but yeah, there is a thing that came from Deus Labs and Microsoft.
I know Vault is working on something similar as well for Kubernetes.
Everyone looking forward to the beer? No more questions? No? Yeah. Oh.
This is not necessarily a technical question, but I know the ETS team and this whole setting is more about, hey, how do we get EKS running? How do we manage clusters? And how do we make it more effective in that way in launching workloads? But interested in seeing if you've had conversations with your customers about adoption of Kubernetes and like what are some of the hurdles they've faced with, hey, I have this cluster, now start using it, and how have they kind of gotten over those humps?
So the question was what challenges customers had to get over when using EKS. Did I get that right?
Not really.
Sorry, I couldn't hear properly.
So like EKS, like managing EKS is more of operating the cluster and making sure the cluster is there and the platform that you put out is working, which is, I consider the easy part. The hard part is getting workloads on it and making sure like your development teams actually want to put other workloads on it. And like part of that is tooling, part of that is culture, part of that is just how you structure your teams and how you get them into that mix, right? So I'm just more interested in kind of like what are some of the non-technical challenges that customers have faced and how they've addressed them to get people to actually use the cluster, not to operate the cluster, but to say, my workloads are there, it's awesome, or this workload sucks, I'm never going to use your cluster again, right?
So as a end user, I've ran into this a lot. The way we kind of solved it is try to make the tooling easy for our engineers to use. So we deploy our applications through Helm, but our engineers don't interact with the Helm CLI directly. We kind of created like a wrapper file, basically, a wrapper script around the Helm CLI to simplify specifying values and kind of created an inheritance system for values. So doing things like that where instead of requiring that they use the Kubernetes CLI, Kubernetes dashboard, the YAML directly, providing tools that they can use that kind of abstract some things away, but at the same time still allowing them to kind of dive into when they really want to use it. It was really helpful for developers that are less comfortable with kind of like server-side stuff, less comfortable with the command line, want something that's straightforward for them to use. That really helped with getting people on board.
I know that Stefan was over there going, but what about the Flux Helm operator? So yeah, if you're looking for like an even next level automation of sort of like not having to interact with Helm and letting an operator, a Kubernetes operator, do that interaction for you, then check out the Flux Helm operator.
Yeah, the idea behind it is you shouldn't touch the cluster. A dev shouldn't touch the cluster, shouldn't have access to kubectl or the API keys. The idea is you interact with the cluster through a Git repository, which developers are used to. If you want to change something in your cluster, make a pull request, someone from your team reviews that change. Let's say you want to upgrade a Helm chart, you want to upgrade Redis to a new version or something like that. Any kind of operation should go through a pull request. Your dev team or your operations team should look at it, approve it, and once it's merged, that new state rolls out in your EKS cluster. So in our opinion, your team should not be forced to interact with Kubernetes at all. They should be just thinking about Kubernetes as a state that you describe in a Git repository like everything else code-wise. This is our GitOps approach.
Just to add a quick non-technical vector to this is, you're right, there are other things. So I'm not part of the engineering team, but I work closely with them, mostly with big customers, very large enterprises. And definitely technical is not where they stumble the most. It is cultural, it is organizational change, it is how to drive education and all those things. So we can talk right after that if you want to reach out and we can talk a little bit more about that.
We kind of take a similar approach as far as not making people think about the cluster. The application development teams, they're organized around their specific application into small units. They're supported by sort of a team that sort of straddles and builds core libraries that they might use that then does interact more closely with us, that create the cluster for them. We use GitLab CI. We tried Flux early on, and it wasn't visible enough for us. It didn't have a UI, and it hurt people because they were used to seeing pipeline check marks that were green, and so they didn't know what was going on. So we centrally manage our EKS configurations for about 10 or 12 clusters from a single repo that does have a pipeline through GitLab CI that deploys the stages and the core services that we provide as a platform. Then the team that sort of is closer to app dev that we work with closely provides those core libraries, some core tooling, and then the individual service owner teams don't care about the cluster. Part of their pipeline generates a deployment manifest that references an image on ECR. They don't even touch it. So they don't really think about a cluster. They can see the dashboard. They have read-only access to a dashboard. Everything else has to go through a pipeline that they don't, the Kubernetes dashboard. I mean, so that's kind of the approach we've taken to abstract that away from needing to care too much about the cluster for the individual app dev teams.
There was another hand raised. Is it a new question or is it an answer to this one? Because I have an answer. Okay, 1 second. I want to reiterate what was said earlier. Moving to Kubernetes is not only a technical challenge. We like to have fun with our operators and our Helm and our everything stuff, but it's not that simple. It's like the move to DevOps. You need to show people why you want to move to this. You need to get buy-in. They need to understand. If I'm a developer, I've never done any DevOps in any way, shape, or form. I just write my code and throw it over the wall. If somebody's coming to me and tell me, hey, you've got to learn Kubernetes and Helm and YAML and all this stuff, I'm just going to be like, why? I don't see the point. A business might see the point quickly. Kubernetes comes with cost savings. Yes, awesome, we're going to do Kubernetes. But as long as every individual team doesn't see that, it's not going to be successful. It's going to be a chore. And abstracting everything away is good. The cluster config, for example, and cluster setup and operation should be abstracted away. The dev team should never know about CNI unless they really, really, really have to, because they're doing something very fancy. But they should know something, and there should be some sessions of upskilling. The world's most, my most pathetic outage was when an RDS instance had a failover. So there was a team that wasn't doing DevOps. The devs were creating a new service. They went to the ops team. They told them, hey, I want a database. The ops team, being very responsible, very nice, spun up an RDS instance with a read replicas, multi-AZ, all the bells and whistles. Very pretty. They sent the connection string back to the dev team. Fast forward 6 months later, RDS had a failover. The RDS performed absolutely perfect. It failed over to the replica. It brought up a new server. Everything was up and was back to fully running in less than a minute, I guess, super fast. There was a 30-minute outage. That was because the dev team did not know there was a database cluster under that. They just asked for a database, not a database cluster. And all they had to do was to set something along the lines of clustered equals true in their library. They did not do that because it was all abstracted for them. So some level of abstraction is good. Abstracting everything away is not good. And that's something that's going to differ from company to company to company, from team to team to team. But when you implement a new thing, doesn't matter what it is, people have to understand why. They have to understand the drive behind it. Otherwise, it's just going to be a chore. And especially with Kubernetes, which requires so much buy-in, so much integration, so much focus, it's something that really needs to be done. And I've seen so many failed projects that you don't want to do that. It's like, again, moving to DevOps. You can, is this recorded? You can break that in many different ways, to put it nicely.
All right, thanks a lot. Let's put our hands together for our brave people up on the stage.